Now, we want to bring in the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers. And Chairman Rogers, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris.
What is the latest intel? What's happening on the ground in Crimea? And from your sources, how far does Vladimir Putin intend to go?
Well, I think he's certainly established that the Crimea is something he does not want to lose his sphere of influence over and is willing to commit military troops. So we know he has special shock-type troops that are trained and specially trained. And we believe that there are some regular units now on the ground in Crimea.
What's your sense? Does Putin intend to take back Crimea? Does he intend to go further into eastern and southern Ukraine, which is also very heavily oriented towards the Russians? Or is he just using this territory now as leverage over whatever the final deal is in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think this is the most important territory to Putin himself. And there's an old expression that Russia without the Ukraine is a country and Russia with the Ukraine is an empire. I do believe Putin understands that. But the most important part for him is military and strategic and both economic impact is the Crimean Peninsula. So I think that's why you see such an aggressive, forceful attempt now to at least build the case for the Crimea to allow them to go into the Russian Federation.
Go into the Federation?
I believe it. Well, we had an interesting thing happen. The upper chamber in Moscow laid out a bill that would allow them to take any part of their portion of was any part of the Ukraine into Russia. That is a dangerous standard indeed, and I think that's probably more bluster. I think clearly that they want the Crimea.
But we're talking annexation then.
I believe that they've allowed them, I think the way they phrased that was to say that if they want to go into the Russian Federation, they would take them. So it wouldn't be a direct annexation from Russia. It would be the Crimea saying they want to come into Russia, and they would allow them to do that. That's the way they structured it.
In his statement on Friday, President Obama talked about unspecified costs if there was any further intervention. And we understand from the 90-minute phone call yesterday from the Oval Office between the president and Vladimir Putin that he specifically said that the U.S. is suspending its involvement in preparatory talks for the Sochi economic G8 summit this summer. Is any of that going to get Putin's attention? Not
even a little bit. If any of that would have gotten his attention, he wouldn't have been there in the first place. So this is not an isolated incident. They're expanding their border. Russia in the South Ossetia has moved out its border some 11 kilometers in Georgia. Nobody said a word. This is direct relation to what's happened in Syria, the negotiations there. They thought they did well. They're holding their position. So if you look at a series of events, Russia believes that there is nothing going to stop them, which is why they've been so aggressive in Crimea. There is not a lot of options on the table. And candidly, and I'm a fairly hawkish guy, sending more naval forces to operate in the Black Sea is really not a very good idea, given that we know that that day has long passed. And unless you're intending to use them, I wouldn't send them. And so you've got now only economic options through the EU, and I would use those. And we shouldn't let the Ukraine get the EU and the United States into a civil war in the Ukraine, but there are lots of really good options leading up to that. And I would just cancel in Sochi. I wouldn't talk about the planning session. I would cancel it, and I would go into a very aggressive posture on how we help the Ukraine financially. If they can get through their financial troubles, they could survive.
Okay, let's sort of talk big picture. How do you think President Obama has been handling relations with Russia versus how Vladimir Putin has been handling relations with the United States?
Well, I think Putin is playing chess, and I think we're playing marbles. And I don't think it's even close. So if you look at the nuclear negotiations, we got our fannies handed to us. They took tactical nukes out of the equation. Huge mistake, especially for our allies in the Baltics. When you move down the list in Syria, the Russians got everything that they needed, they believed they needed in Syria. And so they've been running circles around us, and I think it's really the naive position on the National Security Council and the President's advisors that if we just keep giving things to Russia, they'll finally wake up and say, boy, the United States isn't all that bad. That is completely missing the motivations of why Russia does what Russia does. And again, they have an interest in expanding their buffer zones by influence. I don't think by Russian occupation, but by influence in cases like the Crimea, I think Moldova next, and other places, that it's in their interest to continue to push out that buffer zone. And by the way, the big one that started this was the absolute retreat on our missile defense system in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Caused huge problems for our allies and emboldened the Russians, and it really has been a downhill slide since.
Let's talk about the sanctions. You say sending U.S. ships to the Black Sea probably doesn't make sense. You say that we should just boycott the G8 summit in Sochi. Would you kick Russia out of the G8? How tough would you get in terms of economic trade and commercial transactions with Russia?
I clearly would start the process to remove them from the G8. And I would do it in a very public way with milestones that they could either meet or lose their opportunity to continue to serve in the G8. I don't believe Russia believes that's always in their number one best interest. They still have leverage. I know people say they lost their leverage on gas and natural and energy. Don't believe that's exactly true. They still have that. So yes, that would be something that would be a little bit embarrassing to Putin along the way. They ought to start that process now. They ought to be very aggressive about it. You have Russian troops in the Crimea. That's a serious problem. It's a serious problem for the stability of the Ukraine and, I argue, other parts of Europe. So we have to be aggressive now, and those are the kinds of aggressive things that you can do that doesn't involve the U.S. Navy.
If the president fails to move aggressively, as you would have him do, should Congress move on its own to start to impose some of these sanctions?
I think we should. I think we're obligated to do that, and we should put packages together that ramp it up. If you recall, all of the sanctions that happened on Iran happened in Congress. The president acquiesced, didn't support them, but acquiesced at the end. I think that Congress is going to have to play a very important role in this if we believe it's important to tone down the military options of civil war in the Ukraine.
Finally, looking at President Obama, looking at Vladimir Putin, how do you see this ending? What's going to happen in Ukraine?
Well, nobody has that, that magic ball. I would believe that the Russians would love to see the Crimea as a part of the Russian Federation. It was there until 1954, when it was given to the Soviet Republic of the Ukraine at the time. I think they'd like it back. It's strategic for them militarily and economically.
And you don't see Putin backing down?
I don't believe that there's a good solution unless he can maintain his influence. He'll withdraw his troops if he can maintain his influence, the way he did in South Ossetia and the way he's done in Moldova and other places.
Chairman Rogers, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. And of course, we'll be continuing to monitor developments in Ukraine. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For the record.